Hey, welcome back to Midday Kentucky, everyone. Let me introduce you to Lynn Soward-Zellin from Kinkead Stilz, and you're an employment lawyer. How are you?
Yes, I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Good. Well, we wanted to bring you in because there's been a lot of conversation about employment law over the last few months, and especially you were just saying in the last few weeks in
a
Louisville.
lawsuit against Amazon here in Kentucky that I think we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Right. There have been several lawsuits in the news lately. Amazon, Google, Uber, sexual harassment claims that have arisen recently. And basically those come from federal and state laws that prohibit harassment in the workplace.
I wanted to, now you said federal and state. How different is it when it comes to employment law? If I'm working in the state of Kentucky, does federal law overturn state law?
They're kind of coextensive, so you would, but in most instances they're very similar. Kentucky law tends to track federal law in a lot of aspects when it comes to your rights as an employee or as an employer.
So what is the basis of most of these lawsuits that we're hearing about?
So the sexual harassment cases, they come from laws that prohibit harassment that's based on membership in a protected class. It's conduct that's severe or pervasive and interferes with your ability to work. And so we typically work with employers and we try to encourage them to put policies in place that prohibit harassment, and then also to make sure that their supervisors are trained on those policies to prevent these kinds of situations from arising.
Okay, well, Lynn, for the people that are sitting at home watching now, give us an example of what would be classed as just it sounds awful to say, just an everyday sexual harassment claim. That's an awful way to say it, but just a minor, what do you need to look out for?
Well, you would want to look out for people using racial slurs or gender-related comments about people's abilities based on their sex.
Right.
Things like that you want to be looking out for if you're a supervisor, and making sure that you're preventing that from continuing.
As an employee, how do you know when something has crossed the line from maybe just banter or a joke, and when that's sexual harassment, and what should you do?
Well, it's always fact specific, but if it's something that makes you uncomfortable, we would encourage employers to have policies in place that set procedures for reporting conduct that you think is inappropriate, and the employee should be familiar with those as well and report anything that they think is inappropriate to their supervisor, and then that should be investigated properly according to the employer's policies.
Okay, I want to move on to wage laws, and there's been a lot of discussion about that. Can you touch on that a little bit for us?
Sure. There's always a discussion about what the minimum wage is going to be. For example, right now, under federal law and Kentucky law, it's $7.25 per hour, and most people are familiar with overtime, which is that most workers are entitled to time and a half if they work more than 40 hours in a given week. But that doesn't apply to what we call exempt employees. And whether somebody's exempt depends on things like what their salary is and what duties they perform for their employer. So what we do is work with employers on the front end and make sure they make that classification correctly, so that they can avoid any problems down the road and that they're paying people what they should be paying them.
Can I ask, is a lot of people still paying minimum wage?
It varies by industry.
Okay, interesting.
I wanted to ask you about, this is really important information you've been bringing us here. What kind of rights do employees have in terms of medical leave?
Sure, and that's something that unfortunately a lot of people do have to deal with at some point in their work life. And again, it comes down to policies really for the employers. We want to make sure that those kinds of issues are addressed in a policy before the questions arise. Now, for larger employers, 50 or more employees, they're usually covered by the Family Medical Leave Act, which requires them to provide 12 weeks of unpaid leave per year.
Unpaid?
Yes, it is unpaid, but they can also address by policy whether paid leave will run concurrently with that. So you might have some period that's paid, and employers can, of course, provide more benefits than that.
And I was going to say, it's also good if you are if you are covered by health insurance, there is a part of that where you can tick a little box and put money aside for long-term or short-term
Sure,
disability.
you can have a short-term disability policy, and that's one reason why when medical issues arise, you can have Americans with Disabilities Act implications, workers' compensation, insurance considerations. So we would always encourage employers to contact your attorney so you're fulfilling all of your obligations.
Lynn, we want you back.
I want to come back and talk about flight night.
Please come back. Yes, let's meet at Whole Foods. We'll discuss the next segment.
Absolutely.
Loved, great information. Really.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
having
having
me.
me.
Find out more information up at Kinkead Stilz. There it all is up there. Give Lynn a call if you have an employment issue. I think she is the gal to see. Stay tuned, everyone, for your forecast and entertainment news. But first, let's hear